Plot twist alert. Scott Moe just praised Mark Carney for the exact same China deal that has dug Ford ready to start a provincial civil war, and folks, the absolute chaos of Canadian politics just went from zero to absolutely unhinged. We've got two conservative premiers looking at the same agreement and coming to completely opposite conclusions, which is either a masterclass in how federalism creates competing interests or proof that nobody actually knows what's happening anymore. Saskatchewan's calling it a great day for Canadians while Ontario's treating it like economic treason, and the beautiful irony is they're both probably right from their own perspectives. Buckle up because we're about to dive into why geography, crops, and cars just created the weirdest political alliance nobody saw coming. Let's set the stage because this is genuinely wild. Mark Carney goes to Beijing, sits down with Xi Jinping, and emerges with what he's calling a strategic partnership. China agrees to lower tariffs on Canadian canola and other agricultural products. Canada agrees to let up to 49,000 Chinese EVs enter the market at reduced tariff rates. Doug Ford loses his mind. Auto unions sound the alarm. Former hostages warn about coercion. And then, out of nowhere, Scott Moe steps up to a microphone and says, "Yeah, actually, this is great." Now before you think Moe's lost the plot or got replaced by a pod person, let's talk about why this makes perfect sense for Saskatchewan. The province grows canola like it's going out of style. We're talking millions of acres, billions of dollars in exports, and China has historically been the biggest customer. When China slapped tariffs on Canadian canola back in 2019 amid the Meng-Wanzhou diplomatic crisis, Saskatchewan farmers got absolutely hammered. Prices dropped, markets evaporated, and suddenly all that beautiful yellow canola had nowhere profitable to go. So when Carney comes back from Beijing with a deal that lowers Chinese tariffs on canola, Moe's not looking at the EV part of the equation, he's looking at farm income. He's looking at rural communities that depend on agriculture. He's looking at an export market reopening after years of uncertainty. From his seat in Regina, this deal is an unambiguous win. Chinese tariffs go down, Saskatchewan canola goes up, farmers make money, the economy grows. Simple math. But here's where it gets delicious. Doug Ford in Ontario is looking at the exact same deal and seeing disaster because his economy runs on car manufacturing, not canola production. Ontario builds vehicles. Southwestern Ontario has communities where entire towns exist because of auto plants. When Ford looks at Chinese EVs getting easier access to Canadian markets, he sees competition, job losses, and threats to an industry that's already been through brutal restructuring. He's not wrong from his perspective any more than Moe is wrong from his. This is federalism in action, and it's messy as hell. What's good for Saskatchewan isn't necessarily good for Ontario. What helps farmers might hurt auto workers. And the federal government is stuck in the middle trying to craft national policy that somehow balances these competing regional interests. Good luck with that. Moe's comment about this being a net positive for the Canadian economy is interesting because he's clearly done the math. The value of increased agricultural exports to China probably outweighs the potential impact of Chinese EV competition in his view. Saskatchewan doesn't build cars. They grow crops. The downside risk is minimal for his province while the upside is substantial. Meanwhile, Ontario doesn't grow massive amounts of canola. They build cars. The upside is minimal for their province while the downside risk is substantial. Same deal, opposite impacts, completely predictable political positions. What makes Moe's support even more significant is that he's a conservative premier. This isn't some liberal ally dutifully backing Carney's play. This is a guy who's been critical of federal liberal policies for years suddenly saying, "Yeah, on this one, Ottawa got it right." That's politically valuable for Carney because it splits the conservative opposition. It's way harder for Pierre Poilievre to claim this deal is universally terrible when a conservative premier is on television calling it a great day for Canadians. The strategic partnership language is also worth unpacking. This isn't just a transactional tariff swap. Both countries are talking about increasing overall bilateral trade over the next 5, 10, 15 years. That's long-term economic planning in a relationship that's been rocky at best for the past half-decade. Canada and China went through serious turbulence over the detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, the Huawei situation, allegations of election interference, and general geopolitical tensions. A strategic partnership suggests both sides want to move past that and focus on economic cooperation. For Saskatchewan, that's music to their ears. China's a massive economy with a growing middle class that wants protein, which means animal feed, which means Canadian grains and oilseeds. Long-term stable access to that market is worth its weight in gold for prairie farmers. The fact that Carney managed to secure commitments on agricultural tariffs probably makes him a hero in rural Saskatchewan even if his persona non grata in Windsor. But let's not pretend there aren't legitimate concerns even from Saskatchewan's perspective. Dealing with China is complicated. The same government lowering tariffs on canola today could raise them again tomorrow for political reasons. We've seen this movie before. China uses economic leverage as a diplomatic tool, and countries that become too dependent on the Chinese market often find themselves vulnerable to coercion. Moe's smart enough to know this, which is probably why he mentioned there will be discussions in the coming days and weeks. He's supportive but not naive. The EV component that has Ford so upset is barely a blip on Saskatchewan's radar. The province isn't a major auto manufacturing hub. Chinese electric vehicles entering the Canadian market doesn't threaten Saskatchewan jobs the way it potentially threatens Ontario jobs. So Moe can focus entirely on the agricultural benefits without worrying about automotive costs. It's almost like this deal was designed to split the Conservative premiers, though that's probably giving Carney's team too much credit for political chess mastery. What's fascinating is how this reveals the fundamental challenge of governing a country as geographically and economically diverse as Canada. Federal policy that benefits one region can hurt another. Trade deals create winners and losers. And premiers are going to advocate loudly for their provincial interests even when it creates contradictions at the national level. Moe and Ford aren't being hypocritical, they're being predictable. They're doing exactly what premiers are supposed to. The canola issue also highlights how trade disputes can devastate specific sectors. When China effectively banned Canadian canola imports in 2019 under the guise of pest concerns that nobody really believed were legitimate, it was politically motivated retaliation. Farmers who had nothing to do with the Huawei arrest or diplomatic tensions paid the price. Getting that market access back isn't just about money, it's about not being held hostage to geopolitical drama. Though of course, signing a deal that increases dependence on China could make future hostage situations even more likely. Moe's phrase about engaging on what our future looks like over the next 5, 10, 15 years is optimistic bordering on aspirational. Planning anything 5 years out with China is bold. Planning 15 years out is basically wishful thinking given how rapidly geopolitics can shift. But from a political messaging standpoint, it sounds good. It sounds forward-thinking and strategic. And it gives Saskatchewan farmers hope that they won't wake up one morning to find their biggest export market suddenly closed again. The timing of Moe's support is also interesting. Carney's facing criticism from multiple directions over this deal. Having a Conservative premier publicly back him provides political cover and makes it harder to paint this as a partisan Liberal policy. It becomes a deal that transcends party lines because the economics make sense for certain regions. That's valuable political capital for a new Prime Minister trying to establish credibility. There's also an element of prairie populism at play. Saskatchewan has long felt like its agricultural interests get ignored by Ottawa when they conflict with Ontario or Quebec's priorities. A federal government that actually secured a deal that benefits prairie farmers over Ontario auto workers is unusual enough to warrant genuine praise. Moe might be thinking this is one of the rare times the federal government put the prairies first, and is not going to let that go unacknowledged. But let's talk about what happens when the discussions Moe mentioned actually start happening. Because there are going to be questions. What happens if China uses these lower tariffs as leverage in future diplomatic disputes? What's the contingency plan if Chinese EV imports end up being more disruptive than anticipated? How do we balance benefiting Saskatchewan farmers without destroying Ontario auto workers? These aren't simple questions with easy answers. The net positive for the Canadian economy claim is also debatable depending on how you measure. If you're counting pure dollars, increased agricultural exports might outweigh any losses from EV competition. But if you're counting jobs, manufacturing jobs often pay better than agricultural jobs and support larger urban populations. A farmer in Saskatchewan might be thrilled, but an auto worker in Oshawa might be unemployed. Both are Canadians. Both matter. Whose interests should the federal government prioritize? This is where things get philosophically complicated. Should federal policy aim for the greatest good for the greatest number? Should it protect existing industries even if that means missing opportunities in new sectors? Should it prioritize certain regions over others based on economic impact? There's no objectively correct answer, which is why politics exists. Different people with different values and different interests are going to disagree, and that's okay. That's democracy. What's not okay is pretending these trade-offs don't exist. Carney's deal helps some Canadians and potentially hurts others. Moe's right that it's good for Saskatchewan. Ford's right that it poses risks for Ontario. Both things are true simultaneously. The question is whether the benefits outweigh the risks at a national level, and reasonable people can disagree on that calculation. The political theatre of conservative premiers being on opposite sides of this issue is also just delightful from an entertainment standpoint. You've got Ford in Ontario basically calling Carney's judgment into question while Moe in Saskatchewan is saying this is great leadership. Both are conservative voices. Both are critical of liberal policies generally. But on this specific issue, they couldn't be more divided. It's a perfect illustration of how regional economics shape political positions more than party ideology sometimes. Looking ahead, Moe's support might embolden Carney to push forward with the deal despite Ontario's opposition. If he can point to conservative support from the prairies, it's harder for critics to claim this is purely partisan or poorly thought out. It gives him a defense that crosses party and regional lines. Smart politics, assuming the deal actually works out the way he hopes. The big unknown is whether China actually follows through. Promises to lower tariffs are great, but implementation matters. If Chinese buyers actually start purchasing more Canadian canola at better prices, Moe looks smart for supporting this. If the tariff reductions are more theoretical than real, or if China finds other ways to restrict Canadian agricultural imports, then Saskatchewan farmers are still stuck and Moe's praise will age poorly. Similarly, if the Chinese EV imports stay within the 49,000 vehicle quota and don't significantly disrupt the Canadian auto sector, Ford's concerns will look overblown. But if Chinese manufacturers flood the market, undercut competitors, and Canadian auto jobs disappear, Ford's criticism will look prescient. Time will tell who read this situation correctly. What's undeniable is that this deal has created the most interesting political alignment we've seen in Canadian politics in a while. Carney's got support from an unexpected place, opposition from an expected place, and the whole thing reveals just how complicated governing a federation really is. If you're loving this chaos and want to stay on top of every development, subscribe to Canadian Insights because we're covering all of it. Multiple videos daily breaking down what's happening and why it matters. Hit that like button if this explanation of the Moe versus Ford split made sense, and drop a comment with your prediction. Does this deal end up being the win Moe thinks it is, or the disaster Ford fears? I'll see you in the next one.